We are embarking on one of the most incredible journeys back in time today. For this explainer, we're heading back over 10,000 years to the Taş Tepeler region in modern-day Turkey. We're going to track how early humans made this monumental leap, moving from being hunter-gatherers who built massive Highland temples all the way down into the plains to become the very first true farmers. It's a fascinating story of survival, of innovation, and a massive, massive shift in how we live together as a species. Here's a question that completely flips the script on what most of us were taught in school. Did you know we actually built grand, monumental temples way before we ever planted our first field of wheat? For the longest time, the standard historical narrative was that humans had to invent farming first just to settle down, and only then did we have the free time and resources to build complex structures. But the archaeological evidence tells a completely different and honestly much more fascinating story. We really have to say goodbye to that old myth of the struggling, constantly wandering nomad. Discoveries at incredible sites like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe have proven a new reality. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors were actually highly organized, settled builders. They were living in complex communities, pulling off incredible engineering and artistic feats long before they ever thought about domesticating a single seed. Section 1. The Ancient World of Hunter-Gatherers. To truly understand where we're going, we first need to understand where we started. Up in the Highlands, life completely centered around these massive circular public temples dug right into the bedrock. They erected towering T-shaped pillars, and their art was totally dominated by fierce wild animals. We're talking leopards, snakes, and vultures, alongside very prominent male symbolism. It really reflects a world where humans were just this fragile part of an untamed, dangerous nature, and all their rituals were basically a way to negotiate with that wild environment. Section 2. Why did people descend to the plains? So if they had these incredibly established communities and monumental sacred spaces, why on earth would they ever leave? Well, the answer is just raw survival pressure. Research points to some really severe climate fluctuations during the early Holocene. You combine that with a rapidly growing population in these settled communities, and you get the rapid depletion of local wild resources. Basically, they were eating through their environment. This existential crisis literally forced these communities out of their circular highland temples, pushing them down toward the fertile plains just to find a new way to survive. Section 3. Are old traditions alive? Now, as they migrated down to the plains, a massive question pops up. Did they just abandon their old ways? Did they start from scratch? The crucial point here is that they didn't just forget who they were. Deep-rooted traditions survived, even as they evolved. Think about the skull cult, which is this incredibly powerful ancient ritual documented by anthropologists like Dr. Yilmaz Salim Erdal. They would bury their dead in the soil, wait for the flesh to naturally decay, carefully retrieve the skull, and then often plaster or display it in special niches in their homes. It's a profound, ongoing connection to their ancestors, and that tradition traveled right down with them to the new settlements. The site of Sayburç is a perfect example of this adaptation in action. Here, the sacred and the everyday daily life really start to blur together. Instead of having these giant, separate temples located far away from the houses, we actually start seeing those iconic T-pillars appearing directly inside domestic spaces. They're right next to the hearths and grinding stones, so the grand communal rituals of the mountains essentially morphed into sacred elements that were deeply intertwined with daily household life. Section 4. Transition from round to angular architecture. Settling on the plains triggered a literal and metaphorical turning point in human history. As archaeologist Dr. Ilham Özdağ beautifully points out, there are no corners in nature. The whole concept of a corner is a human invention. To accommodate these rapidly growing populations on the plains, they needed to build adjacent expanding rooms. And you can't easily pack circles together without wasting a ton of space, but you absolutely can pack rectangles. Thus, they invented the corner, sparking a completely revolutionary shift toward engineered, angular architecture. The contrast between these two worlds is striking. The old world was round, wild, and up in the highlands. Those structures were carved directly into solid bedrock on a single level. But the newly invented world, it's square, domestic, and right down on the plain. They start using a cellular plan with engineered corners, building up with mud brick rather than digging down into the stone. And honestly, the engineering is just mind-blowing for that era. Down at Gürcü Tepe, they weren't just slapping together simple huts. Think about their process. First, they lay solid stone foundations. Next, they use a technique called pise,
which is basically pouring molded mud bricks supported by vertical and horizontal wooden beams for earthquake resistance. And step 3, they built a second story. We are talking about some of the very first 2-story houses in all of human history. It's an absolute architectural marvel. Section 5, Agriculture and the New Way of Life.
With this brand new cellular architecture came a monumental economic shift. Instead of constantly chasing wild game, they actually began to control nature. Based on the archaeobotanical and faunal data, we see their very first domesticated assets taking shape. To put that into perspective, they're managing flocks. About 40% of their animals are sheep and goats, and 30% are successfully bred cattle. Plus, they're cultivating wheat for food, which is about 20% of their output, and flax for oil. They totally transitioned from being subjects of the wild to the active managers of their own domestic environment.
There's this fantastic thought from Dr. Mucella Erdalkran, who leads the Gürcü Tepe excavations. She notes that people finally took production entirely into their own hands, experiencing the comfort of living without depending on hunting. That newfound stability completely replaced the need for giant monumental art that was intended to appease the wilds. Their focus shifted entirely to stable, everyday domestic production. But here is a fascinating question to chew on. Did this intense new focus on domestic production immediately create social classes, or did it actually make society more egalitarian? Well, what we find in the artifacts is a pretty dramatic shift. The massive, aggressive, male-dominated animal art of the Highlands just fades away. In its place, down in the plains, we start finding small, genderless, or female figurines deeply associated with domestic life. The role of women in this new production-heavy society seems to have elevated, pointing towards a remarkably balanced social structure at the very dawn of farming.
Section 6, the foundations of modern humans. All of this brings us to the climax of our evolutionary journey. We were looking at the literal birth of the modern city. These people lived in independent, freestanding, rectangular homes. They walked on planned streets, literally some of the first ever documented. And for archaeologists, those ancient streets are packed with data. It's essentially their garbage, but it tells us exactly what they ate and how they lived. By achieving massive domestic agricultural output, they laid the very foundation of modern civilization right there in the dirt.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. We gained agriculture, the 2-story house, the planned street, and basically the blueprint for modern civilization. But if moving to the plains gave us all of that, what did we leave behind forever in the shadows of those circular temples up in the mountains? Every single step of human progress comes with a trade-off. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey back in time, and I really hope this sparks you to dive even deeper into the dawn of our history.